could make a start, please. If we could make a start. Welcome to the special meeting of two select committees, Adult Select and Children and Young Peoples. This is a joint meeting, and as is customary with joint meetings, we will elect a chair and a vice chair. So can I please have nominations for a chair for today's meeting? Okay, Councillor Pratt.
I elect Martin Groker.
And Tudor second. Okay, thank you. And could we please have nominations for a vice chair?
I nominate Simon Howard.
Do we have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Edwards, thank you. If both members would like to come forward. We will do some brief introductions. We shall go around the room and do introductions. Can we please make sure that mobile phones are turned to silent? Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. If we can do introductions then, and I'll start. I'm Martin Groker. I'm the County Councillor for Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and I chair the Children and Young People Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, members. I'm Simon Howarth. I'm the chair of Adult Select, and I'm a member and ward member for Llanelli Ward.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services.
Yeah. Julie Boothroyd, Head of Adult Services, Monmouthshire.
Claire Marchant, Chief Officer, Social Care and Health.
Jane Rogers, Head of Children's Services, Monmouthshire.
Malcolm Lane, member of the Children and Young People's Committee, member for Mardy.
Louise Brown, Councillor for Shire Newton, Vice Chair of Adults and member of the Children and Young People Committee.
Mike Fowler, Parent Governor Representative.
Councillor Maureen Powell, Councillor for Castle Ward and Abergavenny, and a member of the Children and Young People's Committee.
Councillor Jane Pratt, member for Llanelli, Gilwyn and Clydach, and a member of the Adults Select.
Good afternoon, everyone. County Councillor Ruth Edwards, elected member for Llantylia Cresceni, and I'm a member of the Adults Select Committee.
Tudor Thomas, Councillor for Priory Ward Abergavenny, and a member of Children and Young People Committee.
County Councillor Tony Easton, Dewsbury Ward Caldegon, not a member of either committee. I'm visiting you today.
Debbie Blaper from Trellick United area. Again, I'm not a member of either, and so I've come just to observe. I haven't got a life, clearly.
Councillor Val Smith Lambert Ward, observing.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And I have to say that if anybody's watching this in live screening, the reason why everyone is sat over on one side of the chamber this afternoon is that the cameras are only working, and so it means you can see us in our full glory if you are watching this on your televisions at the moment. As I sit here, I would love to see a newspaper headline tonight: Monmouthshire County Council moves to the left. But from where you're sat, of course, you've moved to the right, so I don't think we'll go down there. If we could move on then, item 3 is apologies for absence.
Good afternoon. There's apologies for absence from County Councillors Roger Harris, Laura Jones, David Jones, Joanne Watkins, Sheila Woodhouse, and also from Dr Annette Daly from Church in Wales.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is declarations of interest. I doubt there are any, bearing in mind the nature of the agenda here, but if I could ask if anybody does feel they've got a declaration to make, they do it when it arises. We have no members of the public here this afternoon, which is item 5. So let's move straight on to item 6, which is the Chief Officer's annual report. And can I ask Ms. Marchant to present us with that report?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity this afternoon to bring this report to you. Whilst it's still really in its developmental stage, and I think it's very important as a scrutiny committee that you have an opportunity to input into the analysis within the report before it's finalised. So I know there will still be typos within the report, there's probably some formatting issues within the report, but the critical thing I hope we can focus on this afternoon is the evidence, the analysis, the conclusions, the strengths, the weaknesses of social services and wellbeing in Monmouthshire, which is an area which, as Chief Officer for Social Care and Health and also fulfilling for the Council the role of Statutory Director of Social Service, is my legal requirement to report to full Council on an annual basis. So given that this will be my last report for the Council, it's important, I think, that as my legacy, really, I set out, as independently as possible, where I think our strengths and our opportunities to improve further for, in order really that the Council is in a clear position with my successor coming in and new leadership arrangements coming into place. In terms of annual reports of Directors of Social Services, they've been a feature of life in local government for the last 9 years. It took me some research to reflect that back, and it's evolved over that period of time. When these reports started, directors had discretion about how they reported, but for the last couple of years we've been reporting to the format that you see within the draft report today. You may have a view about whether that's the most user-friendly format. Under the Regulation and Inspection of Care Act, that is a format which we are required to report in, and it enables Care Inspectorate Wales and anybody else who's so minded to compare performance more easily between authority areas. So that's why it's set out as it is. And the focus, as you can see, is around performance in terms of social services, but really about performance of council partners and the County of Monmouthshire in supporting our most vulnerable people to live the lives they want to live, and the ability of social services to function well and effectively depends on the strength not only of the core social services functions, but also the strength of partnerships and our engagement with the rest of the council. And so I think it's really important that the report is outward looking in terms of the strength of all of those arrangements, as well as really delving into the detail of the core of what social services does. What the report attempts to be is very evidence-based in terms of analysis and statements within it, reflecting that there are some areas where performance measures are far better developed than others. So when you look at the annex, which is the National Outcomes Framework, you'll see, I think, that the performance measures still require some work. That's to be subtle. I think I've seen correspondence which says around their fitness for purpose. So what we try to do is triangulate what the national performance measures say with evidence locally from our own quality assurance processes and importantly from what people tell us as well. I think a headline, what I would say is, and for me some of this is reflection back over the last 3 years, that we've seen evidence within our children's social services of sustained progress. There's still some variability, there's still areas to improve around practice and outcomes and performance, but you can see that journey that we've been on to secure a permanent and secure workforce, to have a really clear model of practice which is child focused, to develop our commissioning arrangements and sufficiency of service provision, both in terms of the sort of more intensive end and children who are looked after, but also in terms of an approach around well-being and intervening early to prevent children coming through into the looked after system. And then on the adult side, when I came in 3 years ago, adult services in Monmouthshire was already very well placed, was in a position where really it had been, due to Julie's leadership and other colleagues, at the fore of transformation of social services across Wales. Lots of the parlance that you hear around social services doing what matters and what's important to people came through work that was done here in Monmouthshire before my time. but has continued to develop over that last 3 years in terms of strength of practice, focusing on relationships, focusing on what matters, and being really, I think, very vigilant in looking at, on a continuous basis, the standards that we've set ourselves, and continuing to hold ourselves to that high standard. There are challenges in adult services, some of which are set out within the report, particularly linked to workforce and ability to secure that long-term care workforce around areas such as domiciliary care. I think over the last few years, the strengths of our partnerships has really developed, and that's partnerships inside of the council as well as out with the council. So if I think about the way that we work with our colleagues in CYP and our colleagues in youth enterprise, our colleagues in housing, all of those are areas where we've done a lot of work over the last while to make sure that everybody across the council is contributing to the wellbeing outcomes of the people that we have responsibilities for, understand their responsibilities, for example, around corporate parenting, and that's something which is really important. Equally important, and we have to spend a lot of time in these arenas, are how we work with others in terms of our relationships with regional partners and external partners within Monmouthshire. So if we think about people's lives, and there's that diagram within there, isn't there, about the wellbeing outcomes with the person at the centre and all the different aspects of people's lives, it's always important to reflect that nobody lives in a social services bubble, and social services can never meet all the needs that anybody has in terms of living a really good life for them. And in terms of facilitating that, it's really important that we form all of those really effective partnerships. And where we have to invest time in partnerships, such as the statutory regional partnerships, that those are effective partnerships in which we're able to progress better outcomes for our citizens, that it's not time spent without a return on the investment of that time. And I think particularly in areas like our children's partnership on a regional basis, where we're seeing investment going into regional resource hubs in order to, on a regional basis, better provide accommodation for our looked after children. There's evidence that some of those partnerships are having a good return on investment. On the adult side, through services like My Mates, which we developed here in Monmouthshire and is now starting to roll out across the region, we're able to use investments such as Integrated Care Fund to really improve lives both locally and across the region. So it's important to hold ourselves to account around those things. In terms of the detail within the report, what we try to get across really, and I appreciate it is a long report and could probably do with being about half the length, and that's something that in the lead up to council work on, bearing in mind that there are things which have to be reported within the report that you can't cut out, trying to sort of demonstrate that shift really to intervening earlier, preventing escalation of need up to those higher levels of care and support. And there's a few things I'd highlight there which show some of the progress we're making. On the adult side, there's some tables in there around reablement and the number of people who are reabled who don't go on to have an ongoing care and support need. And one of our priorities has been to make sure that we're maximising the opportunity for people to go through a reablement process. And we can see in some of those tables that around 80% of people who go through reablement don't have a care and support need, are independent, as the performance measure is, after that period of time. There's also a lovely graph over there which shows the experience over time in reducing dependency on care and support of the numbers of adults who require a domiciliary care service and a residential service, which shows that progress through from 2013. And that's particularly positive in terms of performance, in that you will all be ever so aware of the demographics that we face in our county, and notwithstanding standing still, you'd expect those numbers requiring packages of care and requiring residential care to be increasing. So those show the impact of practice change. On the children's side, I think in terms of the numbers within our statutory parts of the service, you can see that there is relative, I use the word relative, stability around our numbers of looked after children, and some of the detail there around the number of children and families that we're supporting where the children are on a care order but actually live with their own families, either placed with parents or with kinship carers. And that's something which, as Children and Young People Select, you might want to have some further discussions with Jane in over the years, because the complexity and the challenge of supporting those families is something which is really causing us to think about how we do that most effectively. You can see our numbers on the Child Protection Register are starting to reduce after a significant increase last year, and that's positive in terms of our confidence that we're managing risk pre that statutory intervention through care and support and through the development of those sort of more preventative services. So overall, I think we are, and Monmouthshire, post my departure, is well placed to continue to improve, that there's sustainable progress, but that's not without risk and challenge. Obviously, one of the key risks around the financial as well as the service sustainability, you will have seen the outturn from last year, particularly around children's services, which is well documented and will continue to cause challenge in terms of ability to live within the resources we have available to us and meet the need of children going forward. And we obviously know the challenges, because it's all of the news every day, as well as something we live and breathe around, managing adult social care going forward. And so that support corporately and understanding and insight into social services will be critically important. But when we get it right, and there's some quotes in the report that I'll just leave you with, the transformative impact on people's lives is absolutely fantastic, and I'm it's a privilege to do this job and the jobs that we do. And thank you, I suppose, from me for the support that I've had over the last 3 years. But we're very happy to take questions and to be informed in terms of the final version of the report by the scrutiny this afternoon.
Thank you very much for presenting that report, Ms Marchant. Before I open it up, from the chair, I would like to say that in discussions before we started this meeting, there was considerable disquiet from members of this joint committee that the report was as unfinished as it is. Sometimes detail missing, other times sentences that are not only ungrammatical but nonsensical. And so it makes the job of scrutiny more difficult. And if I could pass that comment on to you from the committee, we feel that it has hindered the work of being able to scrutinise the report before it goes to Cabinet, which is a great shame, because it's very clear that a lot of work has gone into it. And while we appreciate that, I hope that all three of the senior officers of the department are here this afternoon and hear those comments from the chair. Can I open it up now to question and comment from members of the committee? Do we have any questions or any comments for our officers? Yes, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I do confer that I did have some difficulty in reading the report, mainly to do with the fact that, the contents are missing as a guide to what the report covers, and there aren't any paragraph numbers, and there's a lack of headings anywhere which guide you through reading it. Just as an example, if you look at the first pages to about 12, which, while I appreciate that's an introduction, there was no headings to break up the sort of 11 pages of script, and I think it would have been easier throughout the report to have actually read it and realised the points that were being highlighted better if there had been it had been broken up more into heading chunks. Having said that, I'd like to ask a question about the staff in terms of one of the positive aspects seemed to be reducing the agency staff and having more permanent members of staff on the positive side, and just wondered what the actual figures were and when we'd be able to achieve the target of having no agency staff at all, which is obviously the ideal situation. So I'd like to ask a question about that. There's two other questions I want to ask, but I don't want to get too many questions at the same time. But if I could have the opportunity to come back on a couple of others, Chair. Thank you.
I know that, Councillor Bryan. I'll come back to
Thank you.
If we can have...
all to plan. We'll have no agency staff within the Children's Services workforce by August of this year. So all the positions that we've had vacant have been recruited to, and we're just waiting for checks, etc., to come through, and that's the timescale we're working to.
That's good news indeed. Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks,
I just wanted to add something, because I know there's been a lot of emphasis from a children's perspective because of their high numbers, but certainly just in the context of adults, we haven't been a heavy user of agency workers, but of late have had some serious issues with ill health of staff. And obviously there are times when you do need to use agency members of staff, and we've got a bit of a, not many, but there'll always be a pattern where we will be using in and out agency staff. So I just wanted to reassure members that it'll never be zero, but obviously depending on which bit of the business you're talking about. Like I say, at the moment we've got a couple that we're using in and out to manage our sort of frontline delivery.
Okay, shall I come back to you then, Councillor Brown, if you had further questions? Oh, Councillor Pratt.
Can I ask, thank you very much, Chair. Can I ask a question about complaints? Because obviously they're dealt with separately from general complaints to the Council. And I note that in 2017 to 2018, there were 62 complaints received in the whole of social care, which comments was 75 and compliments was 146. And I think given the number of people that you look after, that doesn't sound as if it's too many. I don't know how it compares with the previous year. But can I ask you, these complaints have to go to an outside body, don't they? We don't deal with these complaints in-house. Is that correct? They're reviewed independently.
There's two stages of the complaints process. At the first stage, we do go through that informal resolution, and they'll be investigated in-house by, usually if it's in a social work team, by the team manager. People have got the right to either go straight to an independent, what we call stage 2 investigation, or if they're not satisfied with that informal resolution, to go to that formal independent investigation.
My question, thank you for clarifying that. My question is, do we know what the average cost is of going out to this independent, to independently review a complaint? Thank you.
I don't, I'm afraid, but we can get you that information. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Fowler.
Hello. I seem to remember a very similar question this time last year, looking at a similar report. I'm on page 68, looking at the qualitative measures for the children's and parents and the children's questionnaires. I seem to remember last year I was perplexed to see that we're in the views of children not doing so well, and then to see us now in the bottom quartile in a sea of red, a little bit of amber, a tiny fleck of yellow, and absolutely no green in there, that the children feel so bad under our care, and to see that the trending arrows are going down, and it feels a very bleak picture in the views of what our children think of our service. So I guess I would like some reassurance that really our children in our care are really not that unhappy, but it looks poor against the Welsh averages and quartiles. And then just a tiny question, really, do we really only ask one question in the parents' questionnaire, as there's only one answer displayed there? That doesn't seem worth asking.
Yes, thanks for that question. The questionnaires that we have to use are mandated by Welsh Government, obviously, and it is we are concerned about that response from children because it's confusing for us, because actually a lot of our other measures that we use with our children and young people don't show that picture. So it's a bit of a blunt tool that we're using to try and kind of gather that. It's a postal questionnaire. It's with a particular time point and a particular kind of, we don't really know which children are responding, so where they are in the system who respond. So it is of concern for us, and we've thought about it as a service, because there's a lot of other ways that we gather information and feedback from children as well, which just doesn't quite add up to that same picture. One really good example of that is the amount of children who attend their looked after children reviews is way higher than the Welsh average. I think it's something like 75% of children come to their looked after reviews at directly engaging with the IRO. And that the response that she gets in terms of, you know, how are you doing, what's your feeling about the service is very different from that picture that shows there. It's really quite difficult to get under the skin of that that kind of survey response to really understand at an individual child level what's going on, because it's done in a, you know, we don't know which child is making which response. It's all done confidentially. The other, you know, other ways that we're doing, you know, we have very high levels of kind of, you know, all our children are allocated a social worker. The practice within Monmouthshire, you know, we have external evidence and review of this is incredibly child focused when it's at its best. We have very good engagement with our care leavers, who then, you know, do tell us about the service, but the fact that they're still engaged with us, still willing to work with us, it says other things about the service as well. So I suppose, yeah, on one hand, we really are concerned about that. We're kind of within our business plan for this year, we've got our set out a bit of an aspiration to kind of develop an overall participation and engagement strategy. Our first step of that is doing the celebration awards for the LAC children. We're going to use that as an opportunity to do some consultation work with them. So I suppose in a nutshell what I'm saying is we're concerned about it. We've thought about it a lot as a service. It is disappointing that we're still in that kind of bottom quartile, you know, in comparison to what other Welsh authorities have had a return on. But it's not the full picture. It's not the full way that we get feedback from children, or the full picture of what I believe children tell us about the service.
Okay, so given it's a set questionnaire set for all children in care throughout the whole of Wales, how are other local authorities doing so much better then? Because they are asking the same questions, must have the same level of apathy or whatever between that. It just doesn't feel very Monmouthshire to see that. And I guess it's a level playing field because everyone's asking the same question. So yes, although you may have other evidence to say that, oh yes, people rate your service, I can't really look past that sea of red to see that we're doing so badly on a standardised question.
It's almost a level playing field, but it depends how they've managed their survey. It depends who's being asked, and we just can't track which children from which cohorts of children respond. So we don't know how many of our looked after children responded, how many children on the Child Protection Register responded, how many of our children with disabilities. It's not just about looked after children, that it's a bigger cohort. So I mean, it would be, I totally take your point, it is something that's bothering us, but you know, I don't know which other authorities where their return was from. So whether they had a return that was all from a children with disability team or a majority, or from a cohort that was on the Child Protection Register and so forth. So it's really difficult. It looks on the surface like comparing apples and apples, but in fact that's not quite the picture. But you know, clearly it's something that we need to kind of think more about as a service, that we've come in that bottom quartile. I think it goes back to the point that Claire raised, that some of these tools for collecting some of this information just are so blunt that they really don't give you a good picture.
May I ask then, would it not be within our interest to speak with civil servants in the Welsh Government to say, look, I mean, we have some discrepancies with what we're doing here, and explain to them that, and perhaps they could look at a new formula or a new kind of database for carrying out this research, because it is so important. If they feel that children within the services mean something to them everywhere, would it not be in their interest to actually listen to what we have to say? Have we done that?
I mean, lots of those discussions have happened with Welsh Government, and in terms of the overall performance framework, not just the surveys, another Welsh Government group has been established to review the whole of the National Outcomes Framework, but specifically around the survey and specifically around its use with children and young people and families. That's something where heads of children's and directors have been expressing concerns really since the start and since this came in. The aspiration is absolutely the right one, but how it's done effectively, I think the professional view is that there needs to be more considered work done to really understand the impact and how children and young people feel about their experiences with us.
I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor, but I wonder if perhaps we could record that as something to take forward, because it does fly in the face of some of the other evidence that's presented in the report, doesn't it? And I think it is a point well made that if it is totally qualitative and we have no control over the way those questions are asked or monitored, then it gives a very different picture of Monmouthshire to other bits of the report. And so could we take that one forward and record that as an outcome from this meeting? Councillor Thomas, you were looking to get in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to say I feel more sort of reassured now that with the explanations that you've provided. I think it's just in any organisation, if you look at schools with their sort of traffic light system, when you see quite a bit of red, it is a concern, isn't it? And the same could be said about the school in Monmouthshire that's on red as compared to a school that's in amber or green. And personally, when I looked at that, read it over the weekend, I did feel quite a high level of concern. But having listened today, then I do feel reassured. But I do think we need to look into this issue more carefully. And at the end of the day, in any organisation, in any service that one provides, it is quite difficult to get the true feeling of people on the ground, in a sense. And in this case, it's children and young people. And that's what we want, because I think that's a very important indicator. It's not, in my opinion, with any service, particularly with children, it's not what we think they should be having or we think they are happy with X, Y, and Z. It's actually how they perceive it, and I think this sort of information is important. But I think there's got to be some refinement in a sense, and we need to be confident that what we're doing is the correct thing. But personally, I feel more reassured with the explanation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. You were looking to come in.
Yes, thank you. I've got 2 or 3 things now, I'm afraid, but following on from that discussion, it does sound to me as if what you're saying is it depends who obviously answers the questions and which cohorts of people, children they are. But I mean, in a sense, do they sort of voluntarily give the information? I mean, is it sort of given out and then they're asked to return it? Is it sort of one of these, so you don't necessarily know who's returning it as such? Because I mean, it seems to me as if that information could actually be broken down into cohorts, and and then perhaps a better authority comparison could be made by actually doing that. But again, I suppose it depends on the percentage of returns that you get from each particular cohort. I mean, I don't know if I've got the wrong end of the stick, but if that's how it's done. The second issue I was looking at was a sort of a more a positive one, which was on page 9, which was about the My Mates thing, which was about supporting people with disabilities to develop friendships. Now, that seemed a very good idea to me, but I just wondered whether it was something that was not just necessarily for people with disabilities, but we've also got an enormous amount of elderly people who are lonely as well, and wondered how that scheme was operating, because it does mention about disabilities as such, because obviously with disabilities you've got a different age range. And the third issue was basically, I have expressed some concerns through emails to the Chief Officer about the access to A to Z access to over 18's adult care records and the data protection involved in that. But I haven't had I've had a general response, but I think it's something that needs to be raised in scrutiny at an adult select. So I'm not sure if the joint select is the correct one to raise that particular issue, but it's something in terms of responses I don't think I haven't got the level of reassurance I would have liked, which I may have got if I had more detail about what had gone on. Thank you.
Councillor Brown, happy to talk about the My Mates scheme. I don't know how many members here know about My Mates. Show of hands. A few, some of my adult select do, obviously, because we talk about it a lot. It's a very exciting development, predominantly started with people with learning disabilities, physical disabilities, and now extending into people who have mental health problems. There is no reason why it can't extend further, and actually we've already got a sort of vision about it being older people as well. At the moment, it's in its early stages. Very excitedly, I can announce that we have just been, we were shortlisted for the Social Care Accolades in Wales. We are now found out that we are finalists for the Social Accolade Wales. I think it's fair to say that we've blown the judges' heads off because it's a very different approach. I have made no... what's the word? I can't remember what it is, but I have gone on record as saying, in my career, which extends quite a long time, I'm not proud of the fact that we've warehoused people in day service and we've warehoused people in service land. And by truly listening to people and understanding really what matters to people, emerged My Mates. And My Mates, shorthand, is a dating agency for people with disabilities. And it has proved to be incredibly successful. It is very skillfully managed by a very thoughtful workforce who have really applied some lovely logic to this approach. And this year, as Claire mentions, and it's written in the report, has been extended to the Gwent community. And for those people who've been around people with learning disability for a long time, as I have, in Monmouthshire, a lot of people know each other because they've been to school together, special schools together, etc. So this opportunity for it to be much wider gives a great opportunity to meet different people like you would through any dating sort of approach. Now, it's not just about necessarily, developing relationships that mean that you're going to get married. Obviously, it's about friendship, it's about companionship, it's about having a social life. And, knowing a lot of the people, as I have done for quite some time, seeing the difference in some of the individuals who have perhaps been in our services for 20 and 30 years. If I paint you a little picture of the last time I was out with them, because I have been out a few times, we went to meet the judges who were coming to assess whether or not the scheme could go forward to the Social Care Accolades. And the scheme decided that they were having a night out in Revs de Cuba. Anybody been to that particular cocktail bar in Cardiff? I hadn't, but I have now, and it was lovely. But I didn't follow them to Coyote Ugly, which is the nightclub that they were going to afterwards. So we had an early evening session with the judges. I think the judges were a little bit blown away, to be honest. One, how do you go and judge something in a cocktail bar in Cardiff? Well, you do that because it matters to those people, and that's where they happen to be. So they came and they spent about 2.5 hours talking to the people that were there. There was approximately 20 people who were part and parcel, and got a sense of what it's about, where it's come from, where it's going. So I think it's as you can tell, it's a very fabulous thing, and there's no reason why it can't extend. It'd need to be different, I think, to accommodate older people. And I think what we've done is it's always been about listening. What is it that people have said that would matter to them? And then it's very much led by the people. It's not led by the staff at all. In fact, to participate in the scheme, we don't provide support. You have to bring your support if you're needing to come. So it's very much on a very different footing. So yeah, that's quite a long way around explaining that, but it's rather good.
Could I thank you for that, Miss Boothroyd? I mean, it's really is it's thinking outside the box, isn't it? And I think it's a super scheme. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think I didn't realise it was a dating agency. I thought it was more of a companionship aim, and I think probably for you know, perhaps for the well, I mean, obviously depending upon what the particular needs or wants are of the more elderly population. I would have thought the companionship side of it was whether it's of the, you know, but you know, it's obviously it's got to be in terms of what the people participating actually want, because, you know, as somebody might be wanting a mate, or they might actually just be wanting companionship. And I think, you know, so from that point of view, I think companionship also has to be stressed as well. Thank you.
Can I just say, Councillor Brownswell, obviously a lot of the initiatives that we've got around our preventative and place-based agenda are doing that now. So in a sense, a lot of people are being gathered into lots of activities and lots of opportunities where they are finding companions, and they are creating, you know, there are lots of groups that have been created all over Monmouthshire as a result of that approach. So that's why I think it needs a bit of thought in terms of, I know I'm using the word dating agency, it is just a shortcut. I mean, it is about friendship, it's about companionship, it is about, you might find love, which would be great, but it isn't necessarily, it's all of those things. I just use dating agency as a shortcut so that everybody gets a picture of what it is.
Colleagues, if any of you would like to give your names in confidence, then I can pass them on to Miss Rogers, Miss Boothroyd afterwards. I've got several questions, I'm afraid, but are any other members of the committee bursting in? Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just declare an interest as well as an employee of ADSS Cymru? I agree with the when you said about the performance framework review, Claire, and I just certainly hope it's going to be quicker than the All Wales Child Protection Procedures review that's still ongoing 2 years later. In terms of the fragility of the social care market, I too have concerns about that. How is that being managed? Is it being done regionally? Is there a market position statement that's being done regionally? How is that? I'd just be interested in that. And are we looking at, you know, either on an authority basis or a regional basis, new models of working between public, private and independent? I know there are examples in England. I'm just thinking one particular jumps out, Knowsley Council, where they're looking at alternative delivery models for social care. So I'll ask that one. I'll come back with some other. Thank you.
I'll start, and then Judy will come in as well to talk about turning the world upside down and some of the alternative model work that we're doing locally. But in terms of the questions regionally, yes, we are working with our colleagues across Gwent. We have got a Gwent-wide market position statement. We have started to do quite a bit of work around workforce on a regional basis. We've got some funding through the Integrated Care Fund to develop a feasibility study for a social care academy on a regional basis. And one of the biggest issue that's really vexing us is, however well we commission, how do we secure a workforce to provide that hands-on care, even if we're the best commissioners or providers of service in the whole of the UK or even internationally. If you're in a county with a demographic with, you know, fewer people of working age and lots of options about where they work, and, you know, an ageing population with need for care, how do we square that circle? So in terms of preparation for the Regulation and Inspection of Care Act, which is mentioned in the report, but I'm sure as a scrutiny committee you'll talk more about in the next year, where all of our social care workforce and our domiciliary care workforce first by 2020 will need to be registered with Social Care Wales. We'll need to have a standard qualification to do that. That's a huge hopefully positive in terms of driving up standards and quality of care, but also a risk in terms of attrition for people who don't want to go through that process, and also a risk in terms of looking at the age of some of our workforce, making sure that we've got the right number of people coming through from different age groups who want to work in care. And some of that work, it makes sense to do on a regional basis. Now, some of that, I would say that in Monmouthshire, because our problems have been more acute than the rest of the Gwent, we're ahead of the curve in terms of thinking differently. And this is probably where I hand seamlessly over to Julie to talk about Turning the World, which I know has been scrutinised at an early stage, but Julie can bring you up to speed with where we are now around it.
I mean, as Claire says, it's an acute problem for us, but one that, because we've been on this journey around Turning the World, which is this programme that we've had in place for coming up 3 years now, the emphasis of which has been about building very good relationships with our independent providers, and that's seen us through some really choppy waters. So each time we get to the winter, it always seems to get a lot worse. Having said that, you feel pressure all through the year, but the winter, it is exacerbated. Because we have worked very, very closely in trying to co-produce what the future is going to look like for domiciliary care in Monmouthshire, those relationships are now very well established. So actually getting together with providers, both in-house and externally, has meant that we've been able to maximise things like the runs that people go on, and being able to, co-work in lots of ways, which I don't think we'd have been able to do if we hadn't got this type of relationship. That said, we do have a problem, and in certain areas of the county, we're sat in Usk, I always mention this when I'm sat in Usk, Usk is the central bit of Monmouthshire, is really tricky for us. But interestingly, latterly, Chepstow has become a bit of an issue, which we're really surprised about, because actually, if anywhere you can think you can pull from the borders, whether it's, when the bridge tolls go, it could be from Bristol, but certainly from Gloucestershire. So we're very minded to the fact that this is not going away. Where we're at the moment in terms of that piece of work, obviously we came into pre-scrutiny, and we're hoping to do a members' seminar. And one of the things that I'm particularly keen to consider as carrying out is actually getting members out in their local wards alongside some of those providers to really understand what does go on. And also, yourselves will have great knowledge about people in communities as well. What opportunities have we got to pass the word on around actually creating opportunities for people to come forward and work in care, because that is part of our issue. So we're going to look at a programme probably through the autumn where we try to really use your expertise and our expertise to try and push this forward. We've currently got 12 clusters. We're operating in a cluster model and trying to patch our workforce and our work with agencies around that. The big stumbling block will be procurement when we get to that, but we're not there yet. At the moment, it's just about working that forwards. But there's a bit of stepping back to do as a result of some of the conversations we've had in here, to be able to move forward where everybody understands what it is that we're trying to do, really. So there's a lot more work I think that we need to do, both internally and with yourselves as members.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've been on this committee now for a lot of years. I'm all for having qualifications and all that type of thing. But I also think that we shouldn't lose sight of the people, youngsters or mature people, who go into the thinking they can care for somebody. Because some children look after their parents, don't they, before they go to school, or a sibling or whatever. And some of them don't take readily to exams or qualifications or A-levels, and yet they could be top of the tree as far as actually being able to do that type of work. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't put those off who are brilliant at it, but they're not really academically minded, although I know sometimes there's medicines and all sorts taken into consideration. But I think we would lose the cream of the crop if we're not careful, if we don't recognise that there are those type of people who would love to do it, but are put off because they think they have to be so highly qualified with exams. Thank you.
I think it's a really important point that you raise, and one that we're very acutely aware of, and hence Claire saying, about the registration, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. We're already scoping who we might lose as a result of that, if you like, that charge to be able to be registered and qualified within a period of time. One of the things that's proved very successful for us is been using other media channels to try and encourage people to join the workforce. And a lot of that is word of mouth, and a lot of that is networking. And the evidence suggests that that's often the better way. So we can have all the glossy campaigns we like. Often it's about I've had an experience, you could have that experience. How can we open the door and help you in? So that, and we've been, certainly in the South, we've had a number of people, we've used our workforce to be the if you like, the talent grabbers of other people, but we're very minded to the issues around qualification, and we are worried about that. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment to scope what might be needed. And also when it comes, if you're a man or a woman in your mid-50s or something thinking that's in by 2020, I tell you what, I might not bother. And we don't want that to happen. So we are, we're on the front foot with this, I think it's fair to say.
Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. I certainly don't agree with the point that was made on my right here. But on the other hand, in the long term, in any job or profession, there has to be registration and qualification, and it does add to the status of that role. And if you look at teaching, teaching at one time was for people who couldn't do other things, and for people who were brought through the pupil teacher route, etc., and they were not particularly well trained or qualified. And I do think you've got to balance it. I can appreciate you need people who can do the caring, but I think long term, sort of ethos and esteem, I think, of the caring profession could be higher. And I can see the sense for balance, but I think in some ways you do need to sort of we need to move on
fair
that.
point. Ms Martin, do you want to respond to that, and then Councillor Powell?
Yeah, I think what we're all absolutely passionate around is having people who are competent to do the jobs that they're employed to do. And some of the work that we have done with the in-house care at home and right across direct care services is to develop competency frameworks for our workforce, supported by the right job descriptions and people demonstrated on an annual basis that they are competent and on an ongoing basis as well. And that those competency frameworks really reflect what matters in terms of good care. And if we can see that reflected right across the sector, then I think we'll be where we all want to be. I think some of the concerns that are being expressed are around perhaps qualification frameworks, which are more about how you might write a good NVQ style, demonstrating your skill, rather than really sort of testing out and demonstrating the competency about really good and high quality care. And that's why we're trying professionally to make sure we're on the front foot, that we're securing the right people, and absolutely with you about the status of care as a profession, and as something that we value, both in terms of what it means for the end user in terms of care, but also value in terms of that workforce. And there's a report which I do mention somewhere deep in the report that was published. ADSS Cymru were part of the commission, as was Social Care Wales and the Care Council for Wales, which demonstrated the value economically to our communities of the care workforce. And it's the 7th largest industry in Wales in terms of economic value. So if we can come at it from all angles, but support really good care and an enabling qualification framework, then that's where we need to be.
Okay, Councillor Pratt, thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I... Oh, my computer's just gone. Can I specifically ask a question on, I think it's number 24. We've got the percentage of assessments completed for children within statutory timescales, and we've got that sort of in the bottom. It's red. Can I ask, how we're going to improve this? What sort of, are we talking about assessments for things like autism and that type of thing, and which is a very stressful time, obviously, for family waiting? Have I got the right end of the stick there?
It's normally speaking, it's the assessments that are required when there's been a referral made around a concern for the well-being or safety of a child. So it may be a child with a disability, but that won't be the majority of referrals. There'll be referrals regarding a concern that's been sent in either by a member of public or another professional.
Thank you. And obviously that is even more concerning than if that is the case, that we're red, because Is this a staffing issue? Is it because purely there aren't enough people to complete these assessments, and what sort of timescale are we looking at for these to be completed? How long are they? Because the child's really in danger if this assessment, it could be really in danger if the assessment hasn't taken place, I would imagine.
The statutory timescale for an assessment is the 42 days, so it changed from the split between the 7 and the 35 with the Social Service Wellbeing Act. So it's 42 days, but it's not a staffing issue. We've got the right numbers of staff who respond, and I'm absolutely confident that there's no child left at risk in Monmouthshire. So when there's a concern, that the decision is made on that straight away in terms of kind of how we approach it from a risk point of view, and staff are deployed, according to the level of risk that is perceived. A lot of it's an improving position for us from the previous year. We were still at that point working with a backlog that had come through from the previous year when we changed over our systems onto plans. Our target for this year is 92%, and this really, for me, is a systems and process issue. It's not about are we going out and responding to children. It's that kind of getting the right assessment completed and on the system within a day and then authorised. So in terms of the going out there and doing it, that happens. This is about that process issue and how we're recording it on the system which is planned.
Thanks. One of the questions I wanted to ask is on that same page, which is page 66 of the agenda. It's item 29B, where we appear to be in green in the top quartile. This is the one I bang on every year, the percentage of children at Key Stage 4 who achieve the core subject indicator. And certainly in 2016-17, we had nearly 29.5%, which was well above the Welsh average, but still fairly pathetic if you are a child in that category. But if you look at the outcome for 2017-18, I know we're talking small numbers, but I would want reassurance that this came as no surprise to people involved, because Monmouthshire is down to 6% of those youngsters at Key Stage 4. Did we know that was going to happen? Did we track them through? And were we surprised that we have now dropped so very dramatically in those outcomes?
Yeah. The cohort that we're talking about this year is 15 children. And we were looking at that this morning, actually. And of those 15 children, I think all but one had additional learning needs. 7 of them were educated in mainstream, but again, only one of them didn't have individual learning needs. That one individual then did achieve against their core subject indicators. The other children were educated within additional learning needs settings, and there was, if I remember off the top of my head, about 3 at the pupil referral unit. And again, this is going back to, this is testing those children, all of whom, bar one, had the additional learning needs, against national indicators, rather than against have they achieved around their own potential, have we done what they can to achieve around their own potential. It's exactly the conversation that we were having this morning, and wanting to dig a bit deeper for our own self-scrutiny about answering that particular question. So for the 14 children who didn't then achieve, are we satisfied that they actually, within their own potential, achieved and did what they could have been expected to do? So that's a bit of work that we want to dig further. And it really does indicate that, on measures like these, especially when you're talking about groups of children, it really does depend on the cohort. And I do recall from last year we had a particularly good cohort of children who would have been expected to achieve and did expect to achieve. But this year, just for whatever reason, the cohort of children was as I described. So we look at it, we do our own self-scrutiny about it. We've got good systems between education and social care in terms of, being over some of the children who were both on both sets of books, if you know what I mean. Confident that we manage it appropriately and respond to those as individual children. But in terms of the measure, it really does depend on knowing your cohort.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And while I've got the mic, this is probably a question for Ms. Marchant. Your report talks about young people with mental health problems and difficulties, and talks about effective joint working with the health services, which I assume means CAMS. Thinking also in the context of a year of the Public Service Board and this requirement now of all public bodies to work together, I spent many years banging my head against quite a lot of brick walls trying to get interagency working up and running effectively. Could you give me any sort of reassurance that after years of me failing, we now are beginning to get somewhere in terms of joint working between ourselves and health in terms of young people with mental illness difficulties?
I can give you that assurance. One of the things that I've done for the last 2 or so years is to chair a Gwent-wide children and young people's partnership, which brings together the 5 authorities, education, health, colleagues. The police have latterly joined that board as well, and our focus has been around mental health and well-being and emotional resilience of children and young people. That's then reflected as well in a Monmouthshire specific partnership, which does the same, but making sure we're really focusing in on our issues in Monmouthshire. Now, one of the sort of challenges for us in social services is how we work effectively with health services around this particular cohort of young people, but right through the pathway from schools and the skills that teachers and counselling in schools have to sort of support children at that sort of earlier part of mental sort of well-being and sort of developing resilience through, and obviously we work very closely with our youth service around that particular part of our offer within schools, and then right the way through primary mental health services. One of the things that we mention in the report in talking about the development of the early intervention and prevention sort of windscreen over the last year is that we've managed to integrate access to primary mental health services for children and young people into that offer in Monmouthshire, and that's been a huge development for us, and it has been quite successful and something which we've developed better, I think, than the other boroughs in Gwent to date, and then right the way through into specialist CAMS services. And I think at that end of the spectrum is probably the area where we continue to experience the most challenges, having done the work over the last year or so to really develop those early parts of the pathway, which is important. So we have very regular meetings, Jane and myself, and then our service managers, team managers with health colleagues around individual children and young people, and we pick up the phone on a very, very regular basis when we need to the clinical leads and others within the health board where there are issues that we need to manage and deal with. And I think we've getting far closer to have a common professional language and practice and understanding of risk around children and young people at that more acute end. So it is a huge partnership endeavour. I do genuinely think my advice and assurance to you can be that we're making progress, particularly at the earlier parts of that windscreen, and our work around individual children and young people continues to be undertaken very, very closely with our health colleagues.
Thank you. And one final question for you, Ms. Marchant. I think it's a very quick one. This time last year, I noted that you had talked about the role of elected members as corporate parents and also responsibilities under safeguarding as elected members. I wonder if all elected members have received appropriate training now.
All elected members have had safeguarding training. One of the things I wanted to check in the lead up of the corporate parenting strategy going through to council was whether all elected members had had their corporate parenting training, because I know it was there and available for people to access during the induction period, but I think we probably need to run again another corporate parenting training.
In that case, I wonder if that could go as an action to take forward from this afternoon, that another session is laid on for members so that we can all fulfil our statutory duties more effectively. Thank you. We've given this a good airing. Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to early intervention and prevention, obviously vitally important to try and prevent any children becoming looked after. I just wanted to touch on the one of the next steps is identified on page 25, Educare resource. Is that Welsh Government funding, and what are we going to do with that money? My second question is on the IPC evaluation work. Is that just for internal use, or is that published externally? Was my question there. And on integrated wellbeing networks, I mean, you've obviously focused on Dewis. Have we identified, are there glaring gaps now across the county where, you know, there's a common theme? I know we've obviously we've got that successful bid for looking at, you know, rural transportation and loneliness and isolation. But are there any other glaring gaps that we need to fill and need to work with independent sector to close those gaps? Thank you.
Can I work backwards, and I'll come to Jane for the Educare answer at the end. In terms of the integrated wellbeing network, one of the areas where we've identified a gap is around that more sort of specialist end of the wellbeing workforce. So you'll see sort of lots of reports around areas such as social prescribing, which isn't a sort of phrase which lots of people in both health or our part of the world particularly like, but for want of a better phrase, that more specialist end of the wellbeing workforce, which links in particularly with GP practices and others, there is a gap for that in Monmouthshire, which is something that we're identified through mapping that wellbeing workforce across, and that would be a theme which is common coming through. In terms of the IPC, that's a piece of work which we commissioned as part of our Children's Services Improvement Programme. The IPC are an independent organisation linked to an academic institution in Bath University. So their evaluative approach has been very helpful to us at each stage of our Children's Services Improvement programme. So as we've moved through, they've looked now, I think, at every part of our sort of system in children's services. And I think those two reports that I referred to in this report were their last two big pieces of work for us as part of that programme. But Professor Keith Moultrie, who's the director of IPC, does sit on our external reference group, which oversees and supports us in terms of our improvement programme for both education and children's services. And then I pass to Jane to support in terms of the Edge of Care grant and how we've used that.
The Educare service is being developed both through some core funding and through some additional monies that the Welsh Government provided specifically for Educare services. How we're using the money, it's part of our whole kind of windscreen approach to developing family intervention services for children and young people. The bit of money that's been identified around Edge of Care is being used in a number of different ways. It's split between support workers who are embedded within teams and undertaking specific tasks linked to the teams that they're sat within, and the other portion of it is being used for a support work service that is specifically to provide time-limited interventions for those families where we've identified that there is a chance of either speedy rehabilitation or prevention. So it's being used in two different ways. Some of the money is being used to support the teams that already exist through embedding support workers there, and the second part of it is being used as a separate kind of service that there would be a pathway to refer to, and the both of those aspects will be supported via the management and oversight of the whole windscreen of children's services, which means that they will come and operate from a psychologically informed basis.
Thank you. Councillor Howard, you had a question?
Yeah, I just got two, Chair. It's going back to the budget graph there. The first one, do we offer respite? There's no budget mandate there within the tree respite for young people, for our children within Monmouthshire? And if so, where at, and do we have a team for that? And my last question then is the facilities grant. We used to have a hold in place for equipment, etc., for social services somewhere, which used to hold equipment, etc., for people who used to have financial problems, or there was grants they could apply to, let's say, or contribute towards that equipment. I know we have a team, a facilities team, go out there and adapt properties, etc., but we used to have a holding area for all the equipment, perhaps chairlifts and things. Do we still retain that? Because there was nothing in there but a small budget headline for it. And where is it? Because I never hear nothing about it. And do our people know out there that it's able or facilitated for them?
I just take the first one about, there's a couple of things I think
The
in there.
respite?
No, the
facilities
equipment.
Yeah.
Equipment's managed on a number of levels. So Gwysis, which you'll have heard about, which is our central Gwent-wide store where our occupational therapists, request equipment from, now known as MediQuip, it's just changed hands. That's at a regional level. Locally, we hold satellite stores for all sorts of different aids and adaptations that obviously get allocated through the assessment process. I'm not sure what you would be referring to in terms of would people know about it. Obviously, if people have a need, an assessment is carried out and we would access either local or regional equipment.
The regional one, is that joint partnership working? Okay, it was just this, in the graph here, which you've put down there, the budgetary side for it, it was trying to highlight which side that was and the cost of it. Because many people do ask councillors, we can't get this or we can't get that, where can we get this from? And I say, do people know it's there? It may be that they've got to pay for it or buy it. They may not be claiming any kind of allowances, etc. So there are people out there. And my last one then is on the respite for young people and severely disabled people within Monmouthshire. Do we have respite care for them? Because I don't see no budget heading for them there. There used to be a place in Abergavenny. I don't know if that's still there or not. We used to rent a building in Abergavenny where people could go for respite. Our young people, not. Do we still have that? And if not, what are we doing for them?
The respite provision in Abergavenny doesn't run anymore, but we have a respite provision for children with disabilities in the south, which is called Herbert Road. We originally had gone into partnership with Torvine to do that, but more latterly we've taken that back over, so it's all of Monmouthshire. It's only Monmouthshire children who use that provision. That was in response to the provision in the north no longer being able to be run. So the provision runs through salaried carers, and there's a rota of children who need respite who use that service. We also have foster carers who provide respite for children if that's required and part of their care and support planning needs.
So children in the north of the county have to go down to the south of the county for respite?
If they're using that provision, they do, yes, but we factor that into their the arrangements that are put in place.
Mr. Fowler and then Councillor Powell.
This one's just directly for Claire, really. Hopefully a final question from me for this, and somewhat of a cheeky one. In terms of, we've seen the whole report and everything and have a picture of where we are. I wonder what your opinion is for adults and children's, for your successor. What's going to be the biggest thing for signposting to this committee is going to be the thing that's going to keep your successor awake at night?
Gosh, I think knowing what's going on, that's the piece for me. Are the systems, and your line of sight such that what you need to know, where you get nervous is if you think there's something not quite right, but you haven't got the evidence or the information to tell you that that's the case. So, as statutory director with, this range of responsibilities, you need to have confidence that your systems bring to your table the things that you need to know.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Going back to the one about respite care and that, isn't there any facility for sort of a daytime thing at My Way, My Life down in Tudor Street. I thought some of them could go there just, because a friend of mine works there. And
that's generally an adult provision. I think the question was about the children's
the
respite.
younger children.
So
not
obviously
the sort of
people who go
early...
to My Day, My Life, there might be some of the children, certainly from a disabilities perspective.
Because when we had a look round there when it first started, and I thought there were some secondary-age children then, a couple of teenagers there then, and I thought perhaps it was still good. You say it's mostly only for adults.
It's mainly an adult.
Mainly, no.
Okay, we've given it a good bashing. Is there any other final comments before we... Yep, Councillor Edwards.
Just a comment really with Mr Fowler's question to Claire about asking about her successor. Well, I can only say all the years I've been on this committee, the team have worked magnificently together and always kept us up to date on things. So I'm sure that whoever it is will have wonderful support in our social services and our children's care and adults. So I'm sure that Claire will leave it in a healthy position, and I'm sure the team will help whoever it is that succeeds her.
Thank you very much for those comments, Councillor Edwards. Let's wrap it up then. I hope that all three senior officers here will remember the opening remarks that I made, and in future years, please bring us a more complete report for us to look at. That having been said, we hope we will be able to help you out a little in future by contacting the Welsh Government around the qualitative data and saying, well, at the moment it's little better than not very useful, and try and get some more clarity in the way that the qualitative information is evaluated, and we'll also, speaking on behalf of councillors, try to ensure that all elected members are able to satisfy our statutory duties towards young people within this county. But before I wrap up, if I could just thank all three of you, Ms Boothroyd and Ms Rogers, thank you very much for coming along. And of course it would be remiss of me not to say that we are all aware that this will be Ms Marchant's final report, and on behalf of the two committees, if I could wish you all the very, very best. I have to say, I think going to the city of Cardiff, you might need all our very best. But good luck for the future. I'm sure it's going to be very different to Monmouthshire. But thank you for bringing that report, albeit in an incomplete state. Let's move on then to item number 7, which is the Safeguarding Evaluative Report. And Miss Marchant, is this you again?
Jane is going to do the initial introduction just to give me a break.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the evaluative report on safeguarding that we aim to bring into Select and onwards to Council on a 6-monthly basis. This is the second time that we've used the current format to present the report. There's just in terms of the briefly, to just say something about the changes that we've made to the structure of the report following the last time that we brought it into Select. We've tried to lift out a front overview page that just describes or sets out the cornerstones of the safeguarding that then we use in the rest of the report, and the front sheet of the table of progress that allows people at a glance just to track where we were the previous reporting period and the reporting periods moving forward. The bulk of the report is around the evaluative measures, so trying to set out what good looks like, the measures against which then we analyse and measure ourselves against, with, where we can, provision of evidence, both some of that in narrative form and more kind of data-driven ways. Some of that evidence, as you will have noted, is not in its full state within those tables currently, and there's still some way to go on really trying to kind of get where we can data to support some of the evidence that we are presenting. And that concludes then those sections with a bit of an overview analysis of how we understand our progress. We've then extracted the case studies and included them as a separate section. Those case studies are try to kind of give some sense of how it looks and feels on the ground in terms of safeguarding, drawing where possible from the broad kind of range of what happens under the name of safeguarding right across the council. And then the priority actions are lifted and brought together in that table of priority actions, which is kind of at section 4. And those are the priority actions that really inform the work plan of the whole authority safeguarding group. The report, such as it is at the moment, is the work of the whole authority safeguarding group. It's not been one person that's tried to bring that together. It's very much reflective of where we are as the whole authority safeguarding group and the safeguarding group's collective endeavour to progress check, critically challenge ourselves to come up with an evaluative score. So going to the report itself, the first section is around good governance. That's making sure that safeguarding is really understood right across the council as everybody's responsibility and a process of continual improvement. We've had some key developments in there around thoroughly embedding the policy which was approved in July 2017. That in practice has meant having good systems in place around the SBAR process, which is undertaken if there's been some sort of risk identified operationally within safeguarding, and the SAFE process, which is our way that we self-assess and progress check every part of the council and the services that are operating under the council to check that they are doing what they need to do in terms of having the right safeguarding procedures in place. And because we've used this time to really test through how that SBAR and SAFE process has played out, we've nudged ourselves up from a 4 at previous reporting period to a 5 in this reporting period. Similarly for workforce, we've nudged ourselves up a score there, and I think that's mainly been to do with the fact that we've have in place now systems which help us access the data that we need to both check that our safe recruitment processes are in place and that our workforce is trained in the basics of safeguarding, understands their duty to report and so forth. We've still got some way to go in terms of really delivering against our target areas through the safeguarding workforce training strategy, but because we now have that data in place, those mechanisms in place to receive that data to help us better understand the problem, that we've given ourselves some increased scoring there. The other major improvement or improving area in that workforce piece is around our volunteer workforce, and I think we've managed to include some data as evidence around that. The third cornerstone of safeguarding, we understand, is that preventative approach, really trying to understand and respond to emerging themes that are coming through, at the same time as reducing risks and issues through early intervention. I think that's where we've managed to show some strong progress in terms of the developments which we've talked about earlier around place-based approaches, wellbeing hubs, and the development of the family support offer through children and families. The next step around that is that kind of thorough embedding and implementation of those approaches, which we would hope to be achieving over the next 6 to 12 months, so the next but one reporting period. Number 4 is that robust protection. We've scored ourselves for last time and for this time. I think that's recognising that there's some work still to be done around understanding the performance framework for ensuring that robust protection is in place and delivering against some of those performance areas. This is all about that kind of how do we respond to concerns, are the right plans in place, recognising that we've got some changeover of personnel within adult safeguarding world and an ongoing improvement piece to be doing within children's services. So not a kind of increase in the score, but feeling that our kind of risks and balances that we have in place kind of just keep us in that stable position. For safe services, we were starting off from it was one of our bigger developmental areas as a whole authority safeguarding group. We've nudged ourselves up again from a 2 to a 3. That's been really in response to, particularly in response to the implementing the outcomes from the internal audit, which had taken place in relation to external placements for children and young people. And the other area that we've developed there is through an agreed model of risk approach to commissioning and contracting right across the council. That's a piece of work that's been undertaken by the whole authority safeguarding group. There's a key piece of work there to do now around really mapping that across the council so that we understand the position moving forward around how we really embed safeguarding within that contracting and commissioning monitoring process. So I think that's pretty much in a very broad brush stroke the report such as it is today and the evaluative measures. We are en route to council, but we're in a bit of a decision-making process at the moment as whether we hold off to wait for the outcomes from the Welsh Audit Office report, which have not yet been received, because clearly we would want to be measuring ourselves or kind of testing out any recommendations that they've made against our own self-evaluation. So that's pretty much it from me, apart from questions, unless, Claire, you wanted to add stuff in.
Thanks very much. Ms Martin, did you want to add to that before we open it up?
No, I'm very happy to take any questions alongside Jane and Julie.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Thomas and then Councillor Eason.
Just a comment, really. I'm just somewhat surprised that not your fault, but that the audit report hasn't come through yet, because obviously members of children and young people and probably adults took part in that survey and report, and it just seems quite a long way away now, and I'm just surprised that it hasn't come through. And so it's certainly not the fault of this authority, but I would like to see it coming through, because obviously it's an important part of this process.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, Chair, I think we've raised the issue of where the report, what the timescales around the report is with both the Audit Office and with Care Inspectorate Wales, and I know that Will McLean has also raised it with Estyn, given that it was a tripartite review by the 3 inspectorates. And I think there's a fair degree of frustration on this side of the table, given the amount of work that we put into in quite short timescales around our self-evaluation and evidence and the field work. So it's a personal frustration as well that it's not come through before I'm leaving as well, but to share that frustration.
I wonder if would it be helpful to you as officers if from this committee we wrote to the Audit Office and said we think we've waited quite long enough to hear. Yeah, well, there we are. Could we note that as an action then, that we'll write to the Welsh Audit Office and say that we would like to hear the outcome of the inspection? Thanks. Okay, so Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is very similar to Councillor Thomas's. It's to do with the safeguarding on the Curbcraft, which we do a report. Is this report due in parallel or part of this report? 6.8, the report resulting from this inspection not being received, or has it been received?
The Curbcraft report went to the last Cabinet meeting and is being scrutinised by Strong Communities on an annual basis now.
Have we done it on Strong Communities? Was I there? Yes, you were. I'll go back to sleep then.
I wonder, could I just, I think, give a bit of correction there. But the Curbcraft now it comes to the Children and Young People Committee, and at its last meeting we did decide that we would go to annual report from now on, because we were so pleased with the progress that had been made in properly implementing that scheme. Councillor Pratt and then Mr Fowler.
Thank you very much. Can I go to 6.4? And there was quite strong criticism there made about the authority still did not have effective enough management information systems and processes to enable it to receive appropriate and evaluative management information about safeguarding. Obviously, that's a very serious criticism to have been made, and it's something that we do have complete control over. Are the team confident that the right investment has been made by the council in these processes and management information systems, that this information is now, if Eston came in tomorrow, they'd be happy with what we've got? Thank you.
Double check of the cover report. Yeah. I mean, that really was around kind of tracking where we were at that point in time, which was February 2014. I mean, from that, there's been so many developments. I'd say I could probably say with quite confidence that they if they came in and with that same lens looked at us in the same way again, they wouldn't say that. I think the mainstays around that is this kind of reporting mechanism that we have, the 6 monthly basis. We've developed the whole authority safeguarding group. We've really kind of revised the policy in July 2017. But I mean, it's all, from my position, it's almost unrecognisable where we would have been in 2014 with safeguarding to where we are now, just in terms of the depth and the scope of what we report on around safeguarding, how we understand safeguarding and what that really means right across the council, the buy-in that we've got, again, right across the council, to the whole authority safeguarding group, the SWAR process, the SAFE process. All of these systems just weren't in place in 2014.
Chair. So from that, I can ascertain that you're completely confident with the systems that are now in place, and there's nothing that you feel that's outstanding that needs further investment.
Taking a bit of liberty, I guess, because of where we're at. One of the issues we have identified for further investment is around, just a part-time post around corporate whole authority safeguarding, because the nature of our safeguarding and quality assurance unit is such that it's very engaged operationally in managing protection in both adult side of the business and children's services, as well as hosting a number of other posts who are on that operational side of safeguarding. In terms of pulling these sorts of analytical reports together, we do have a gap since Kath Sheen moved into another post within CYP, so that is something we're looking to secure resources to fill.
Thank you. I wonder if I could ask, on page 82 of the agenda, this is where there is one red in the RAG rating, and it's obviously an issue around training. Test out understanding of duty to report across the workforce. And it says, whilst it is current training, there has been no significant progress. Does this suggest that maybe we should look at a different sort of training?
I don't think so. I think it's about timing of bedding it in. The duty to report is a fairly new duty. So it's something that we've really got to kind of see now whether this does have an impact on how many referrals for adult safeguarding come through the door, but it's probably early days to really understand how and whether indeed it will impact. I mean, the duty to report is a statutory duty now to raise the concern. I would have to think that there wouldn't have been that many concerns going through that weren't reported previously. This places a different emphasis on it, and we'll have to monitor.
Mr Fowler and then Councillor Brown.
Hi, it's pleasing to see in 3.4 in your table there of your self-assessment scores that all but one has moved upwards, which is good. But then I start looking for evidence into that, and then I come across Appendix 3. And Appendix 3 seems to be more holy than a sieve in terms of its empty boxes. And I'm looking at that, and I see boxes with 3 or 5 question marks in it, which clearly isn't quite acceptable to annotate it and go, I don't know, which just scares the bejeebers out of me. And then there's just many boxes that are empty. And when you're trying to tell me that you've marked yourselves up on these measures, and then against your measures you have no evidence or suggestions or further actions or anything, I wonder on what you're basing that you're moved up a level.
Yes, thank you. The Appendix 3 is very much around the priority actions going forward, rather than the evidence that we were trying to, tease out to show why we had differentiated our scores. It's indicative, I think, of where we are in terms of the work in progress in developing the overall report. The actions are set out in that. In the left-hand bit of the table at Appendix 3. I think it's our, how do we really show evidence against whether those actions have been completed. So there is certainly further work to do there. The evidence around testing against our cornerstones from safeguarding are really in that body of the report, which, again, there is development work to do there, particularly around bringing some of that data through, so that we've tried to understand for our own purposes really how we're really progress checking on safeguarding. So our cornerstones remain fairly static. What good looks like around those cornerstones of safeguarding remain fairly static, and that's the bigger tables in the body of the report. The action plans, the priority actions that we're pulling out, which are attached to Appendix 3, are that kind of, the work in progress that we'd hope to be ticking off as we're moving through, that then go on to inform, well, how well are we doing against the overall measures? So I think it's, yes, we've clearly got more work to do around really tracking those actions through the whole authority safeguarding group, and really kind of nailing that table in terms of what would it look like if those actions had been completed. And that's, I think, probably the main piece of work that we'll have to do on our next group.
Ms Rogers, could I ask if there's a deadline by which you hope to be able to complete the table?
Well, the deadline would be the next council if we were, ready for the presentation at the next whole council meeting, if we are making that decision to move forward in that way at this particular point, notwithstanding the previous conversation that we've just been having about the Welsh Audit Office report.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was looking at page 101 and 102 and just wondered why the script was in red and if there was any particular reason for that. The second question was in relation to page 107. At the bottom of that it says, in terms of good governance, there's a box on the left-hand side which says, testing out the effectiveness of arrangements in the 2018-19 internal audit work programme, evidence question. Now, I was just thinking that obviously you're awaiting the external audit report, but there's no reason why you can't have internal audit look at various particular issues. And so I wondered if there could be a comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pick that up if that's okay. In terms of the red, I don't think there's any particular reason, unless it's something I'm not aware of. Jane might comment on it. In terms of internal audit, for probably the last 3 years at least, safeguarding has featured in the internal audit work programme. The reasons for the question marks in terms of the focus, exactly what aspect of safeguarding they'll look at within that internal audit work programme, will be driven by the evidence of where we think our risks are, part of which would be informed by that Wales Audit Office and partners review to us. So I think there will have to be a judgment call. It's clearly important that we report and advise Council on the effectiveness of our safeguarding arrangements, and to delay that too much because there's an external review due would mean we weren't fulfilling our own responsibilities to advise council. And indeed, you know, we need to take our own risk analysis on what the focus of the internal audit activity will be this year if that Wales Audit Office report isn't forthcoming within a reasonable timescale. But I can give assurance that for the last years, as long as I've been here and probably before, safeguarding has been a key feature of the internal audit work programme.
So will it continue to be? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, have we got any final questions or comments before we wrap this one up? Well, again, if we could thank senior officers for bringing the report to us, and again, if we could make the point, it would be even better if it was completed. But nonetheless, thank you very much for bringing the report to us, and clearly a very important area of our work as a county council. I think we have moved a long way, haven't we, colleagues, since the days when we were in special measures, and whatever the outcomes of the inspection, I cannot see the authority being put back into special measures, and that reflects a lot of hard work that a lot of people have done, for which we are grateful. So thank you very much indeed. If we could move on to agenda item 8 then, and introduce Mr. Bakewell, who is the authority's Housing and Communities Manager, to take us through a report on Disabled Facilities Grant. So good afternoon and welcome.
Afternoon, everybody. This report is by way of a periodic update in respect of the Disabled Facilities Grants Programme. It does actually link very much with the conversation that you've just had in relation to safeguarding. The Safeguarding Inspectorate did speak to us about the Disabled Facilities Programme. They were very interested, particularly around children's DFGs. And as a result of that, we have slightly changed our approach. Previously, we've just reported on the whole disabled adaptation programme, and we hadn't broken it down into adults adults and children. But as a result of that, as a result of the inspection and comments that we received, we've started to highlight the two as separate entities. So something we've not done before, but I think again on reflection and hindsight, I think it's probably it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to go into any particular length with the report. We consider it's a good news story. The emphasis of the Disabled Facilities Programme is very much on how quick we're able to turn around grants. And we've been able to significantly reduce the speed with which we have been able to complete people's grants. So we've almost halved the timescales for 360 odd days down to 193, if I remember rightly. So that's so we're very pleased with that, and I think it's a bit of a testament to the team. We've got a very, very small team, and I think they've done a really good job considering the so few of them in that team.
But equally, I think a key element of the success has been the council's decision to increase the funding available to the programme. Last year there was an additional 300,000 made available, as was this year, and I think that's been a key factor. And some of you will be aware that we've brought it to committee on a few occasions. We've been running out of capital well into the financial year, which has led to grants being put on hold. So that's really all I wanted to say at this stage. I think the only other thing was just really we've put a case study in there to give an example of the impact on DFGs for a child. I've also brought another one, which again I think just highlights what a massive difference it does make to people's lives when we are able to deliver this service. So that's all I really wanted to say at this stage.
Thank you very much. Could I just say before I open it up that I think many of us elected members will have seen for ourselves examples of the work of just sometimes very small things that are done, but the huge difference that it does make in the quality of life of people. And if you could pass on our thanks to your team who administer the grant, and it clearly does have a major impact on some people's lives. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you very much for that report, and it's very encouraging to see that these improvements have been made, and I think it's very poignant. I would like to mention, obviously I heard the news like many of us that Jenny Barnes of Care died over the weekend, and she was somebody who spent her life dedicated to trying to help the lives of disabled people. So I'm sure she would have been very pleased to have heard this today, and I just wanted to make an acknowledgement to her today, because it's very sad news. Thank you.
Yeah, can I thank you for raising that, Councillor Pratt. I think many of us will have known Jenny Barnes over the years, and what a tremendous fighter she was for people with disabilities, and what a shock it was to hear of her passing. So thank you for raising that with us. Any other comments? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Hello, Ian. Yes, it's always enlightening to know that they're not waiting quite so long as any disability. If it's born, you've had it most of your life, and as we have always been told in the news every day, there's more and more elderly people coming forward, and obviously if they can stay in their own home, it's so much better for them and their extended families and everything. And as we all know, we are not building enough houses anywhere, so that's pressure in itself, let alone pressure for suitable housing for disabled people. And I think then it all knocks on to almost bed blocking in hospitals if they haven't got the facilities to go home to, and in all of that it always adds stress to the patient, stress to the whole family, and that doesn't help the situation whatsoever. But also I think maybe as far as planning goes, with that sort of hat on, I think developers mightn't like it, but most probably in all social housing we have now, we have toilets downstairs and the ability to make sure there is a shower to be fitted in there also. And I think all developments ought to have that, because we all take it for granted we're going to have one bathroom in the house. It's usually upstairs, and if somebody's disabled, they need perhaps a facility downstairs as well. And I think that should be almost an obligation to all developers to make sure that that is possible, because it must be very stressing for people if they've become disabled and having to move out of their community or their home because it cannot be adapted. And I think all these things should be a long-term aim to facilitate these things when we are always told that there's going to be more and more people that don't get elderly with good health. Very often there's even arthritis. Simplest things, that a handrail or a shower instead of a bath, just the simplest things can make a tremendous difference to their quality of life anyway, and I think we should take that forward as well. Thank you, Ian.
I know the issue of new development, and I say it's less so the issue in terms of affordable properties, isn't it? It's more the general development, and obviously there's only so much as an authority we've actually got control of. But the optimum scenario would be every property would be be future proofed, and over a period of time it would hopefully ease this situation. But I guess we're quite a long way away from utopia, really.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. Just taking the comments from Councillor Edwards just a step further. I mean, obviously, in terms of social housing, then the need for a toilet downstairs is something that's already been mentioned. But what about in both social housing and private development, about having houses designed so that it's easy for wheelchairs to move about, and that the doors are wide enough for having bedrooms downstairs and that sort of thing? Because a lot of those things, if they were added to initially, would make it a lot easier, and would mean that quite a number of the things that you have to go for DFGs with better design would have actually you wouldn't necessarily need to do so if there was a better design in the first place. And I just wondered if there was any sort of regulations or anything that was in the offing to go along that sort of policy line.
No, I think you're quite right. There's, I'm as I sit here, I'm not completely familiar with the standards, but we do know that the standards just don't go, or in our opinions, just don't go far enough, and obviously would need a significant change in the regulations. So the example you've just given about wheelchair accessible accommodation, to my knowledge, that's not part of the standards, and obviously it's something that's way beyond Monmouthshire County Council, and it's that would be national policy and national regulations, and I guess over a period of time it will probably come, but I don't think I'm not aware of anything that's in the pipeline overnight. And equally, I guess even if it did come, the focus of our work is it's probably really it's all retrofitting type work, and as Councillor Edwards says, we've got this ageing population, and that demands just is just doesn't go away really. So but yeah, it'd be nice to think that we were attacking it on both fronts rather than this reactive approach, I guess.
Chair, may I just add though to this? I think it's a very valid point, what we're discussing here, but there is a compromise here. So you start to make extra bedrooms downstairs, you start to take downstairs toilets and make them to a certain size. You would then speak to families. We've got to create family homes as well. Do you want a bigger lounge? Do you want a bigger sitting room? Do you want a bigger kitchen? Or would you like a disabled facility downstairs? There is that balance you have there, but I think this conversation long term is what we should be having as a council. In reality, I think it's something which we could look at in the next probably decade, but in life as it is now, it would be very difficult to deliver unless you had a firm policy. But as a council, we probably could do a bit of work on this one. I think it would be really important, especially on the planning side of it. How can you legislate that you've got to put a downstairs toilet and it's got to be a certain size, unless all doors are 3 foot wide in properties? So there is a bigger picture with all this, and I think it's a very valid conversation, but where we go with this long term, unless we had a stringent policy, a national policy within Wales, would be very difficult. But it's a really good topic to ratchet up for the future.
I wonder if I could Councillor Edwards, I was going to say I want to pull this back to what the report is about, which is about adaptations to existing housing. We're beginning to roam off into what new buildings would be best be like. That's not what the report is about and what we should be discussing. So can we get back to being focused on adaptations and the use of the grant to facilitate that? Councillor Edwards, is your point pertinent to that?
Yes, because I do believe, Ian, that if they apply for a grant, and it could be considerable for some adaptations, do you not claim it back if the house is sold or something like that anyway, so we don't just spend it on one sort of house, and it could be hundreds of thousands, couldn't it, for some?
Yeah, if the DFG is over a certain amount, and as I sit here, I can't remember, I've got a feeling it's about £5,000. But yeah, if it's over a certain value, there's a charge put on the property, and if the property is sold within a certain period of time, we can get the value of the grant back. We did actually have a cheque back a couple of weeks ago for about £30,000. So it doesn't happen very often, but the provision is there, and say occasionally we do, we are able to get a bit of money back, which is obviously helpful.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I presume this covers sort of a range of age and range of situations, because obviously I wondered if you'd got good liaison with the NHS in relation to bed blocking, because obviously there can be a gap between a time when an elderly person is ready to leave a hospital but hasn't got the facilities in the home adapted in order for them to come back home, and wondered how often this situation arose, and if there was sort of any specialised work in this particular area at all.
Yeah, that's an important part of the infrastructure that the Disabled Adaptations supports, particularly the Safety at Home grants. They are minor adaptations such as handrails, steps, small ramps, like bars at the side of the door. Jobs that probably only cost typically, a couple of £100. They can be delivered quickly. They're delivered on our behalf by Care and Repair. So we hand over an element of the budget to Care and Repair, and they administer that alongside a very similar programme that they do on behalf of Welsh Government called the Rapid Response Adaptations. So a lot of those adaptations are to facilitate quick discharge from hospital, and I'm aware, the feedback that we get from Care and Repair is it works very well.
I wonder if you could just look at the recommendation and then perhaps draw this to a halt now, because the recommendation is that we consider how the programme is supporting residents, and I'd like to thank the officer for bringing that report, which is very clear, and to make recommendations. Now, we have heard from Mr. Bakewell that the grant for this was raised. We've heard also that he said it was spent out, and we have heard from members of this committee the problems of an increasingly ageing population in Monmouthshire, so it's a pressure that isn't going to go away. And I think that looking forward, I think perhaps as a committee we should very clearly raise the point that this is a very, very valuable grant serving a very valuable function, but that we need to keep it under review because the pressure on it will grow and grow over time. And I would hate to see it withering on the vine because that's not topped up to take that into account. And would members agree that that is perhaps the way we should take this recommendation forward? Thank you very much for that. If we could make
one criticism, Chairman. I do have lots of residents say to me that when they had or have had the equipment, they don't know what to do with it after. And I'd hate to think there's lots of things lying around people's houses, or even go to the tip or go wherever they go with it, where actually we can reuse them. Can we make sure that we have something in place that we do actually keep in contact with where we install, where we fit, and where we collect from? I think that is a valuable little bit of information there, because there are many thousands of equipments out there which sit in people's houses where they don't need them. Hip replacements, they come, they're great, they help them out, lift the chairs up, do whatever. But £200 or £300 sitting in somebody's house where somebody down the road could actually be waiting for that. Can we make sure that that is actually made aware of for care and repair, and we follow that up with our views, please?
Yeah, this report wouldn't cover equipment.
It doesn't?
No, I suppose the closest we'll get to providing equipment is a stair lift or like hoist type equipment. So you're actually talking about the the social services equipment store, as you say, such as chairs and Zimmers and
But that's the
commodes,
thing I
that
need to
type
pick
of
up on
thing.
here. We seem to have
So-
some cross thinking here, because
Yeah.
you may have somebody coming out of hospital who wants that, and somebody who wants the other one we're talking about here. So there's some crossover here, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody that's needing to come out of hospital would be assessed as for their needs to, what do they need to come home? And it could well be that it's a combination of equipment, as you say, plus an adaptation, or one or the other.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I see no further raised hands, so colleagues, could I thank you all for your eager participation this afternoon. And for those of us who are on Adult Select Committee, I will see you all again tomorrow afternoon, when I will be more than happy to let Councillor Howard take the chair again. Thank you all for your attendance this afternoon.